Here is a background, nevertheless, perhaps to accompany the questions. In Module 10, you refer to the sophisticated way of nourishing ourselves that is desirable to facilitate this process. You also infer that fasting and superficial detoxification methods don't cut the mustard. I've already started to explore Ayurveda and completed a couple of taster courses online. But I've realized it's a very complex science and I don't feel equipped to self-diagnose, treat. I recently went online to explore local Ayurvedic clinics and Panchakarma treatments, as I think I'm probably full of ama, right? That's Sanskrit term for toxins. But unfortunately, the price tag attached to these treatments was way beyond my budget. So at the moment, I'm going to have to go down the DIY route. I believe that my primary dosha is pitta, but I have a lot of vata and not much kapha. My understanding is very basic. I'd be grateful if you could point me and other course participants in the right direction in terms of further reading and online resources in order to educate ourselves. So the questions themselves are, let me just put this here. Are there any universal principles and practices that we should all be following, regardless of our individual doshas? For example, is a vegetarian diet an absolute must? It's a very complex topic and a very complex question to begin with. I mean, it's so complex that I cannot even give a ready-made staple kind of response to this because of the risk of running or completely taking you outside of really where I would prefer your attention be in this present moment. Of course, those of you who are born already into a culture where the so-called ethical values which incorporate into themselves an aspect of non-violence is a part and parcel of that way of life. And vegetarianism is, for that reason, has been adopted in some of the cultures. Today, perhaps the most known is the Hindu one, the Hindu way of life, which is pretty much based on the laws of Manu, advocate ahimsa principle as one of the rule of thumb of how one's supposed to conduct one's affairs in the world. The word ahimsa itself is very interesting. It simply means and translates as non-violence. You see? Ahimsa. So it's that, again, that Sanskrit negation here, which delivers the subtlety of what we speak about here. This principle here is, of course, with regard to the full scope of how we live and conduct our affairs. And that includes what goes on to our daily regiment and what goes on to our plate. But the conversation doesn't stop there. This conversation of what to eat is so all-encompassing that if we are to apply this only in relation what is good for me, what is most suitable for me, just for me in the given moment in time, for my process, for my evolution, and so forth, we might be in danger of missing an opportunity to redress something here which is of value. And of course, this also a conversation where not just hairs being split, this is where a lot of passionate discussions and head-butting been going on for many, many years. I myself has witnessed that over decades of all these, pros and cons of all this for and against. Some people present a whole heap of arguments against vegetarianism. Then there are those who consider vegetarians being hypocrites because they are falling short of the what the veganism and what the proponents of vegan diet come up with. And there are many other little smaller pockets and subsidiary different streams of various perspectives on what we should be eating or what we shouldn't be eating. What comes to mind here is a great and simple response Maharishi Mahesh Yogi gave when he was asked what to prefer and what to do when it comes to these principles. And let's not forget, back in the days, Maharishi was trying to appeal to the millions, to the masses. His job was to bring meditation to every household. So of course, he couldn't have had placed any demands or any such prerequisites for those who were willing to adopt meditation as their daily practice in terms of narrowing down their choices when it comes to what people are supposed to eat or not. But of course, he was coming from that very culture, tradition, and that traditional set of values where he couldn't have just forgone that. So his answer serves here, and I invite all of you to ponder on this. He simply said, choose into your diet what has least consciousness in it. As simple as that. So in other words, his suggestion was, choose the food which does not belong to creatures of this planet that also embedded with highly evolved nervous system, because this will free you from unwanted entanglement with a lot of things here, and I'm not speaking here in terms of that very strict adherence to the understanding of what the law of karma. Not so straightforwardly, of course, this translates into, if you eat cows, then the cows will eat you in the next life. Obviously, this is not as simple as it may sound. It is much more complex. It is much more interwoven, interconnected. But the message here is very clear. Anything that evolutionary here, everything that is supposed to be in the process and feeding this process, and in a way it has to somehow adhere to the totality, to the whole. So of course it's very interesting that these perspectives that began to circulate in Western culture somewhere approximately in more popular way. I mean, they came much earlier. There were movements of for vegetarianism going all the way back to Victorian England. We can find many references from very many people in various cultures in the West who spoke passionately to that in favor of vegetarian lifestyle as opposed to meat eating. But I'm not going to go there. But I want to draw your attention is to the arguments that were brought up by some spiritual communities as early perhaps as the 60s and the 70s, which took several decades until we're now finding ourselves on the planet with the predicament where meat industry costing us cutting down rainforests, and with cutting down the rainforests, particularly in those parts where they are meant to serve us as lungs of this planet, with tremendous speed. Because this is a fact, this is not fiction. So whatever our attitude to that kind of documentary, which is enjoys this very ambivalent reception, cowspiracy, this fact cannot be denied. And we've lived in Central America, and we have traveled in Central America, and we have seen and we have spoke to people how everything is being cut down for the plantations of the bananas and for serving as the food for the cattle. Because the cattle it requires huge territories, it requires a lot of water for just simply supplying the United States alone. And Brazil is in the lead as #1 country which supplies the cheapest meat on the market. So these are just considerations. Take it or leave it. Ignore it. There are people who also take a so-called religious, quasi-spiritual attitude. Well, my meat is halal or kosher or what have you. I go to the butcher who prays in front of that lamb or whatever before they slaughter and before they cut its vein. Well, Bernard Shaw said it before me. I mean, have you even witnessed once a slaughter of an animal? I did. I took part in it, still as a very young man, because I grew up in a country where this is a custom. I held that lamb, white, beautiful, astonishingly stunning, white, fluffy lamb. I held, it was 3 of us, 3 young, powerful men it took to kill that animal with all our force, right? Because this was supposed to be performed as a halal, as that religious ceremony. A few words of prayer were uttered, blood was drawn into the large bucket, and there we go, okay? It was skinned there and then to give it to an air to ventilate and to cool it off. I know what it is like, yet this did not stop me eating meat for quite a few years, because I wasn't born a vegetarian. I still continued in that same vein until something happened to me, or something astonishing happened to me, when I've realized, and my mother was partially to be credited with that, because she wrote me in one of her letters, when she was already a meditator and a vegetarian herself, convinced vegetarian to that whenever next time you wish to eat some meat, especially if it's a beef, I urge you to go to the countryside, take a train, because I lived already in London. Take a train, go to the countryside, because you're a city boy now. Go into the village, find a nearest herd of cows. Make sure you come very close to a cow and look into that creature's eyes and tell me what you see there. And if you do that sincerely and you want to carry on eating meat after that, then I'm not going to talk about it. You have my blessings. So being the only son, I did that what my mother said, and it turned my world upside down, because of what I've realized is precisely what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's words meant to direct my attention. It's not like packaged beef in a supermarket or nicely sensed with served with gravy sauce, medium, raw or whatever, well done. It was an animal, but animal full of awareness, consciousness, looking back at me, blinking in fact, curious, trying to smell. How do I smell? What vibes do I put off? And my vibes were not that nice. Okay? It was a vibe of a scared human. So I'll stop here now, because I don't want to go into lecturing mode. But choice of what we eat is not just what you and I decide to eat. It's a choice we soon will have to make collectively as human beings. And so if some of us make that choice, or that choice is being made for us, then that is part of what is on order. Because disorder has been raging on for way too long. And this is a homework. You have to find out all the odds and what and how. Because this cannot be taken on trust. Yes, stop all your this and that and give preference. No, it's not about that. It's about understanding. When understanding is there, extraordinary things begin to happen. When understanding is kind of partial, then our choices are partial. We are driven mostly by the unconscious and subconscious desires. We are on autopilot. So we repeat everything, repeat, repeat. I don't know how long we have left to do that repeat thing. So that's the response to your first question.